back. We're reading Army Brats, and we're on chapter 7. One of the things Tom liked about having a military mom was hearing about the tactics, strategy, and vast number of elements that went into planning any intelligence mission. When Mom did her tour in Afghanistan, the family had learned about being an operative in a hostile environment. Mom's letters described some of the methods she and her team used when carrying out a clandestine operation, like using camouflage to move unnoticed in concealment to hide and evade being detected by the enemy. But that information had never felt relevant to Tom's own life until the terrible pocket knife incident with Chase. Now, on Friday morning, as Tom skulked down the hall of Fort Patrick Middle School, feeling vulnerable to attack at any moment, he realized that he was an operative in a hostile environment. And if he wanted to survive the rest of the day, let alone the rest of the year, he was going to need some new tactics. 3 days of Chase shoving Tom whenever he passed, sneering at him and making rude comments under his breath, had made that all too clear. What made matters even worse was that the other boys in the class saw all of this, and no one wanted any part of it, which meant Tom was completely on his own in enemy territory. Yesterday afternoon had been the worst so far. Chase elbowed Tom in the back while he stood at his locker, and Tom had hit his face on the sharp edge of the locker door. He had also nearly screeched at the surprise attack, but bit his tongue in time. But Tom knew his luck was running out fast. It was time to make a plan of action. As Tom made his way through the crowded hall, he thought he heard Chase up ahead. Just in case, he quickly turned back around, happy to take the long way to class if it meant avoiding Chase. But he knew he couldn't just run from Chase all year. That wouldn't be feasible. Plus, it would mean Tom would have a new problem of being tardy to class. Tom bent over a water fountain, his face hidden, and considered other options. The best goal would probably be trying to redirect Chase. Tom could use Mom's method of camouflage and concealment to hide himself in plain sight, so that Chase stopped noticing him and found another target, which wasn't all that far-fetched. After 3 days of dealing with Chase, Tom knew what a short fuse he had and how easy it was for that fuse to ignite. If Tom could just stay out of Chase's crosshairs until Chase identified a new target, Tom would be home free. In the past, Tom would have relied on Charlotte to be part of his mission because, as Mom always said, you wanted someone to have your back at all times. But because they had so many different classes, because Tom didn't have lunch in the cafeteria, and mostly because Charlotte was consumed with her new friends, she hadn't even noticed what was happening, and Tom was too ashamed to tell her. He was the big brother, after all, and so as he headed toward his English class, with his head down, shoulders hunched, ducking behind bigger kids whenever possible, Tom was working solo. Dad often said Mom was good at treading lightly, which gave her the advantage of being able to spot an enemy before the enemy spotted her. Tom tried to emulate that as he slipped into the classroom, the worst class of the day, because he was actually seated next to Chase. Tom did a quick scan of the room and saw that he had arrived before Chase. Good. He walked carefully and quietly to his seat, then slid down to make himself as small as possible. It wasn't as good as actual camouflage, of course, but hopefully it would still do the trick. "Hey, Tom," Kenny said from across the aisle. He waved the new Hulk comic at Tom. One Tom would normally be excited to check out. But Tom just gave a quick nod, then turned away and ducked down even lower in preparation for Chase's arrival. He didn't need Kenny attracting attention his way. Chase came in as the bell rang, and Mr. Yannetti was closing the door. Tom kept his focus down on his desk, but from the corner of his eye, he could see Chase settle into his seat and begin unpacking his supplies for the class. He didn't seem to register Tom at all. Tom let out a small breath of relief. The fact that Chase hadn't muttered anything or even glared at him had to be a sign that Tom's mission was off to a good start. "All right, everybody, take out your homework from last night and set it on your desk," Mr. Yannetti said. "I'll come around and collect it." Even his most basic commands sounded like orders, and Tom, along with the rest of the class, moved fast. Tom had spent over an hour on the short answer reading questions, and now he gently removed the 2 pages from his binder, being careful not to wrinkle them Miss Giannetti, who had been assigning homework since the first day of school, had a policy that all work needed to be neat and legible, or it would have to be redone. Tom smoothed his papers, feeling a flicker of pride at how good they looked. Maybe he hadn't made any friends at school, but at least he'd get a good grade on this assignment. And then suddenly, several wet black blobs appeared on Tom's pages, bleeding into big splotches that obliterated Tom's work. "Hey!" he shouted, the word brittle and loud as he whipped his head around to see what could have caused such a disaster. When he caught Chase's eye, he knew. Chase was smirking, and for a quick second he flashed the tiny sprayer he'd used to send colored water splashing right onto Tom's paper. Of course, Chase had perfect aim. "Why is there yelling?" Mr. Yannetti asked sharply, turning around from where he'd been collecting papers at the far end of the room. "He ruined my homework," Tom said, possibly a bit too loud, but his heart was beating hard, and he was almost pouting, as if the ink had been a weapon someone had just used in a surprise attack, which it actually kind of was. Tom's hand was shaking as he held up the soggy pages to show the teacher. Certain Miss Giannetti would be as upset as Tom. "Bailey, you need to take responsibility for your own work. We don't blame other people for our mistakes, not in this class." "But, sir," Tom protested. "You can redo the assignment for half credit," said Mr. Yannetti. He was back to collecting homework from the other students. "Wait, why would I only get half credit for the work, sir?" Tom asked. He must have misunderstood. And it would take him another hour to remember all his answers since the pages were now completely illegible. "I am offering you half credit to give you a chance to correct your mistake," Mr. Yannetti said. "But this isn't fair, and Tom started. Mr. Yannetti turned to glare at Tom, who crumbled under the harshness of his gaze. "Sorry, sir," Tom whispered. Tears of fury and frustration pricked his eyes, and he blinked them away fast. He heard the slightest snicker and looked over to see Chase, who was grinning. "You had it coming," he whispered. But Chase had pushed his luck just a little too far. "Are you speaking out of turn in my class?" Mr. Yannetti asked, his sharp gaze falling on Chase. "Sorry, sir," Chase said. Tom could hear a scratchy hint of anger in his voice. "Both of you boys have detention," Mr. Yannetti said. "Right now, that's just for the next 2 weeks. But if I hear a single word out of either of you, if you so much as breathe loudly, that turns into a month. Are we clear?" "Yes, sir," Tom and Chase both mumbled. Chase was looking at Tom again, and this time he was not smiling. With sickening certainty, Tom knew that the fallout from this disastrous mission would be really bad. Really, really bad. Detention was awful, of course. Mr. Yannetti sat at his desk at the front of the room, watching them the whole time. He insisted on complete silence from Tom, Chase, and a girl named Simone, who'd had the misfortune of getting caught passing a note in Mr. Yannetti's other English class. Simone's eyes were teary, and she sniffled the whole 40 minutes, making Tom even more miserable. When Mr. Yannetti finally dismissed them, Tom was beyond eager to get home. Still, he sat and waited for Chase to leave first. He did not want to have another run-in with his enemy, not today. So Tom left the building last, grabbed his bike, which he'd ridden to school with Charlotte this morning, and headed home. His shoulders slumped under the weight of his backpack and the worries he carried with him. It was another muggy afternoon, and his t-shirt was damp and unpleasantly sticky under the nylon backpack by the time he reached Bingham Road. He waved to several neighbors who were outside gardening, then coasted down the sidewalk and was about to turn onto his block when he saw something hit him. When something hit him. Tom let out an epic screech of doom. Blinded by a powerful stream of water, he swerved directly into a tree. He fell off his bike, choking from the water that had gotten into his mouth and hoping that it had muffled the screech. Because when he finally wiped his face off enough to see what had happened, he saw Chase, a hose in one hand, his phone in the other, laughing his head off. "Very funny," Tom said, trying to sound dismissive. But his voice was wobbly. He was still kneeling in the grass, and he was wet and bedraggled from the spray. "It was funny," Chase agreed, dropping the hose so he could wipe his eyes too. Though in his case, he was wiping away tears of laughter. "Man, you're a real wimp, screaming like that over a little bit of water." Okay. It had been more than just a little bit of water, and it had hit Tom hard, but he knew there was no way to say that and not sound like an even bigger wimp. So he stood silent and sopping, unable to think of a way to defend himself at all. My dad's going to be pretty angry about that detention, Chase said, so I wanted to find a way to thank you for it. His eyes were glinting like a snake inspection inspecting its prey before going in for the death blow. I'm just glad I had got a photo of it. He held up his phone so everyone else at school can see it too. Yikes. Tom's knees were weak. Once the classmates saw that, he'd be a complete laughingstock. But Chase wasn't done with him yet. See you Monday, Sergeant Wimpy, Chase said, grinning at his new name for Tom. There it was, the death blow. Because Tom knew no matter how he plotted or strategized, no mission in the world could save him from his fate now. Blinking back tears, Tom grabbed his bike and took off, away from home, so he wouldn't have to face his family wet and humiliated. At the edge of their neighborhood, he turned left down Washington Street, passing the park and rec center and then the pool. At Patrick Boulevard, he turned right, heading toward the woods and the lake beyond. It wasn't that he wanted to go to the lake, really. He just wanted to go where there weren't kids or neighbors or anyone else, just the road in front of him and the wind on his back. The trees shaded him as he rode onto a few cars passing, and all of them careful to give him a wide berth. That's a wide space. Sweat ran down his back, or maybe it was water from the drenching he'd received. Either way, it made his skin crawl. When he reached the boathouse, he didn't stop, but instead went in a wide circle and headed back to the main part of post. But then, at Crimson Drive, when Tom stopped at the traffic light, he realized he wasn't ready to go home. Not yet, so he turned right, riding along Crimson Drive, until he reached a road so narrow he nearly passed it. And as he looked down the small tree-lined street, he felt something other than misery, curiosity. Because on a base alive with activity at all times, this little alley seemed completely remote. So Tom pedaled over to check it out. There was only one building on the quiet, wooded one-way road. It was a large wooden structure with 2 floors and a big yard out front that wasn't exactly sloppy. This was an army base after all, but it wasn't as neatly kept up as the area around the other buildings on post. The bushes grew a bit high, and it had been a little while since the lawn had been mowed. There were no cars in the driveway, and the trees close to the building shaded it so completely that no sunlight fell over the house or the yard. The windows were dark, and several on the second floor were boarded up. They were broken because they were boarded up. Tom was even more curious now, so he parked his bike at the end of the drive and approached the building. The air was still and it was quiet. No birds flew overhead and no little animals scudded through the yard. Tom slowed as he reached the steps to the front porch. Despite the heat of the day, it felt chilly, perhaps from the thick cover of trees above. And then Tom saw a slight movement through one of the panes of glass in a small side window, a flicker as though someone or something had just walked past. Goosebumps prickled his arms. A sound came from inside the house, a moan so faint Tom wasn't sure if maybe he was just imagining it. But after a moment it came again, and Tom jerked back, picturing a zombie or banshee wailing as it clawed its way across the basement floor toward him. Just then Tom felt a sharp tap on his shoulder. He leaped in the air, screeching the screech of doom, then turned and saw a soldier, sweaty in his fatigues, and not the least bit zombie-like or scary. "You okay?" the soldier asked. He was looking at Tom with concern. "Sorry to startle you, but this is a restricted area. You need to move along." Tom did not need to be asked twice. Whatever was inside that building had him completely spooked, and he was not sorry to leave it behind as he hopped on his bike and pedaled away. But as Tom biked through the central plaza, stopping to let a line of soldiers marching in formation pass, the ugly name Chase had called him came back to him, Sergeant Wimpy, and Tom couldn't help but wonder if maybe, just maybe, the name fit. And that is the end of chapter 7. I'll see you for chapter 8. Hope you're enjoying the book as much as I am.